Origins and welcome to CG Reaction. This is Catherine the Great. Not quite Catherine yet. Okay. Extra history part 1 of the channel, extra credits. Before she became Catherine the Great, legendary empress of Russia. Oh, this is about Russia. She was a smart but lonely girl named Sophia. Her mother ignored her until family connection proposed a marriage between Sophia and the presumptive heir to the Russian throne. And suddenly she was thrown from her quiet life in a backwoods mansion to the center of cutthroat political world. Okay, so this is gonna be, I guess, video about some, some commoner girl becoming empress of Russia. What? That what happened? Yeah. This is gonna be a fun video. This was channel extra credits. I like this channel. I reacted to World War I video, then I reacted to Bismarck video. It was the series. It was fun. So yeah, remember people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction there's a link in the description. Check out the cast with the different playlists like history, old sarcastic production, internet student, CGP Grey, oversimplified, and yeah, let's do this one.
A young girl sits alone in a cold room in a great house on the German coast and dreams of being a queen.
German coast. So she went from Germany to Russia. Okay.
That girl's name was Sophia, or Sophie, depending on who's writing about her. She was born in the spring of 1729, but her mother would never forgive her for the crime of being a girl. Her mother, young, ambitious, always wanting to be the center of attention, was deeply discontent in her life, having been married off at 15 to a man 21 years her senior. Worse still, that man was poor, at least by her standards, and stuffy. Her life was nothing like the glittering court that she'd known as a girl. She still had ambition. She still wanted to escape her husband's drab military post, to live in high society and see the world. And to her mind, that required a male heir. And so poor Sophia was neglected, often told that she was ugly, yelled at for minor offenses, or simply left entirely alone. She was bright.
See, shit like this breeds people, in a way that they grow up with resentments, dark thoughts, I guess hatred to society. People like Hitler basically rose up with things like this. Not always, but lots of times that kind of thing happens. I hate shit like this. I get it, she had some vision. She married to someone that, I guess she didn't like. She didn't get nowhere. I get that her situation was bad, but that's no reason to take out on your kid. Seeing your kid as, I guess some kind of a, get out of poverty ticket is just effed up. People might call me right now fascist or communist or whatever, but I think, shit like this tells me that, there should be some kind of, I guess, process. Like, I don't know, some kind of psychological, I guess, exam or something if somebody wants to have kids. Not everybody should have kids. That's what I'm thinking right now. Obviously, that's not my view. That's like, everybody's freedom, but still. Of all the issues that happened in the past, people like Hitler can easily be tracked down to the fucked up childhood. Even today, you hear lots of cases of how people go with really bad childhood that fucks them up whole life. This is what I think. Not everybody should be allowed to have kids. This is very, communist, fascist type of view. But, yeah.
And could memorize things with ease, but she frequently infuriated her tutors by asking questions like, why were the great men of antiquity damned just because they lived before Christ? Or, what was the universe like before creation? She found solace only in the lessons she was taught by one of her governesses, who introduced her to French and brought her books by Racine and Molière. And all the while, her mother doted on her sickly and infirm brother, who'd been born a year and a half after she'd entered the world, unwanted. Sophia would always harbor a resentment over the treatment she received compared to her brother, but in 1742, when she was 13, her brother died, succumbing to scarlet fever. She had one other brother who would survive.
See, that shit like this, what I hate is, women were treated really badly in the past, obviously. Daughters were treated really bad. People killed if, the child that was born is female. That's how badly they were treated. But a mother treating her girl like that is just fucked up. You are a woman yourself. You went through same shit. You should be sympathetic. I get it. You want a meal ticket out of this, but come on, man. I mean, does she have some kind of a psychological issues here? Is she psychotic at some level? How could you not have somewhat of a, I don't know, some care for your kid, I guess?
their youth, but he was a half-decade younger, and so now, at last, her ambitious mother's eye finally turned to her. But she didn't receive the warmth and the affection that she'd hoped for. Her mother's aim was to see her married. After all, her mother thought, taking her daughter out in search of a match to travel and get back to court might provide a path to escape her drab life. Unfortunately, her daughter was proud, impertinent, and arrogant, or at least so she felt. If there was to be any attempt at matchmaking, she was going to have to break Sophia of these habits. And so, Sophia learned to hide her pride, to hide her talents, and her mother began writing and visiting all of their relatives in search of a match. And she made sure that Sophia knew just what failing to find a match would mean. From time to time, she would take Sophia to see spinster relatives locked away in a convent, or shut away in a remote wing of a family house. One of these encounters Sophia would remember forever. An aunt who lived in one small room with 16 pug dogs. 16 pugs who did everything that dogs do in that one room. The smell would haunt her for all her days. So she rapidly became enamored of the idea of marriage. She saw it as a way out, an escape from her mother. But her prospect...
Damn, what an asshole. So she basically, showed all the things that, if you don't do this, you're gonna get locked up, something like that, or gonna live in a room with all these pugs or something like that. She literally psychologically tortured like that, just so she would get married. And apparently her getting married means that she's the one who's gonna get all the, royal treatment. Apparently, I don't know how. I guess she just thought that, if she can, marry Catherine in some rich house, she would be treated richly too, I guess. I don't know.
Were limited. Her father was not a man of great means, and though he was a prince of one of the tiny principalities that then made up the Holy Roman Empire, he wasn't even the prince of that domain, having others in the line of succession before him. Her mother, on the other hand, was of the House Holstein-Gottorp, one of the great houses of the Holy Roman Empire. And though she was from a minor branch, she could still reach out to all her cousins. And so it was that, even before her brother died, on a visit to her uncle, Sophia met the orphaned Duke of Holstein, Peter Ulrich, 11 years old at the time. This young man was the heir to the throne of Sweden, and the last surviving grandson of Peter the Great. He was also sickly though, doughy of features, and even at the age of 11, given to drink. This meeting would prove fortuitous in years to come, or disastrous depending on...
So let me get this straight. She is from Germany. Now she is meeting somebody who's in line to throne of Sweden, and apparently she became Empress of Russia. That's jumping from place to place, isn't it?
Now you look at it. But long before that chance encounter was to change her life, as she was making the rounds looking for a suitor, attention of this type fell on her much closer to home. At the age of 14, a 24-year-old cuirassier, her cousin, began to, what was called at the time, show his affections, often finding her in some secluded corner of the house when no one else was around to kiss her. He eventually proposed to her, although she expertly put him off by agreeing to it only if he could get the consent of her parents. Then, in the middle of dinner one night, a letter came. It was from Russia, from the Russian Empress, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, whose sister had married a Holstein. Elizabeth, who was the aunt of Peter Ulrich. Elizabeth, who had been betrothed at one point to Sophia's uncle. Elizabeth, whose association Sophia's mother had been very careful to cultivate, regularly sending her news and portraits of her daughter. Elizabeth had recently become the guardian of young Peter Ulrich, adopting him as her own. And as such, young Peter had lost the right to the crown of Sweden, but had gained a much greater prize, succession to the crown of Russia. Elizabeth's letter said nothing of its...
Yeah, okay, so I guess, that's how she's jumping from place to place. Yeah, Ulrich was basically in line to throne of Sweden, but since Empress of Russia took him under her wing, I guess, because he's her aunt, because obviously that's the case. Usually, different countries, monarchs and kings usually bind relations with each other to keep peace or whatever. So yeah, that makes sense. So now apparently he's in line to throne of Russia.
Purpose, but simply implored Sophia and her mother to travel at once to Russia. Despite the letter's vagueness, the implications were clear. Sophia might yet find her way to being a queen, as she had so often daydreamed. But the night's surprises weren't over yet. Mere hours after the first letter's arrival, a second courier, breathless and panting, burst into the house. He too had a letter, but this one was from Frederick the Great, summoning them to his court in Berlin. Sophia's mother wasted no time starting to pack. The invitation to Russia had come with a banknote for 10,000 rubles to equip them for their journey. This, of course, went not to making sure that Sophia looked like a bride that they had both hoped she would be, but instead went towards outfitting her mother with a splendid array of court dresses. And so they began their journey.
I guess, C is equivalent to today when you see, those mothers who took their daughters who's not even 10 or something, I guess, force them to, I don't know, what is that shit, ballet or whatever, the pageants and shit. There's even incidents of where mothers does plastic surgery on their daughters who are not even 10 or 11 years old just for the pageant. It's not for the daughters, obviously, it's the mothers who wants their attention. That always pisses me off, man. Like, what the fuck? Where's child services at that point?
First to Berlin and then to Moscow. When they arrived at Berlin, Sophia's mother raced to present herself to Frederick. But to her shock, he simply asked where her daughter was.
No shit.
She hadn't taken Sophia with her to court, thinking that the king couldn't possibly want to talk to the girl more than to her incredible self. So she said that Sophia was sick.
What a narcissist. I mean, why would the king ask her to come if it's not for her daughter? Why would king take interest in her?
Next day, too, she showed up at court alone, and again Frederick asked where Sophia was, and again her mother said that she was sick. On the third day, Frederick pressed the issue, and Sophia's mother said that she couldn't come because she had nothing to wear. At which juncture, a somewhat miffed Frederick the Great cut her off and asked one of his sisters to just lend the poor girl a dress, please. Finally, Sophia appeared before the king, in an ill-fitting dress without jewels or finery. She was shy, worried about what this great man might think. But to her surprise, and undoubtedly the surprise of her mother, she was seated at dinner that night right next to the king. Her mother wasn't even seated at the same table. The king tried to make her feel comfortable, speaking to her of poetry and of the opera, plays and ballet. And though everybody stared at the king talking to a child, he continued on and she opened up, speaking to him throughout the meal. By the end, he saw in her, hidden just below that layer of humility, an intelligence and a perception.
Seriously.
He wrote to Elizabeth of Russia to say as much. He had been assessing her, because in his bid to make Prussia a player on the world stage, he had already created many enemies, and he knew that he would have to have Russia on his side. It was his hope that this German princess could help ensure that. But his business was not just with Sophia.
Now look at that. Sophia is part of the, all this international play that she probably doesn't even realize. Like the king of Germany or whatever is basically Prussia, whatever at the time. So, he's basically, doing all these things to fix the relations with Russia by, making sure she marries, the king on the line to be king of Russia, the boy there. So, he's doing that and he was literally assessing her. And he was talking about all this poetry and things that I guess only nobles at the time would be more versed in, I guess. But she read all these things since childhood because she was interested in. So she was also, going back and forth. So he realized that, look at that, it's, she's also a royal blood because she's the daughter of, I guess, one of the princes or something. And she's smart too. So I guess, she can definitely become the queen of Russia or whatever.
In private, his agents asked her mother to be their agent in the Russian court. They explained how one Count Bestuzhev was the sworn enemy of Prussia, and that he would stop Sophia's marriage if he could. And so Sophia's mother, Johanna, should do everything in her power to make him lose favor. Never again would these two rulers meet in person. These rulers whom history titles the Great. But it's far from the last time that their paths will cross. Join us next time as Sophia finally makes her way to Russia, and her mother sets about trying to destroy Count Bestuzhev.
Damn, I like this story so far. It feels like I'm watching some kind of, that kind of story where obviously she's not just any commoner. I mean, she's the daughter of, I guess, one of the princes or whatever. Not the, main prince or whatever of the Germany, but one of the princes. But still common enough if you really see whole picture. But, somebody who just, I guess, who was a girl basically, her mother hated that. because her mother thought that son is the only way to get out of whatever situation she was in. She was treated poorly and everything. This feels like one of those Disney stories or something, where it was Cinderella type of stories or whatever. She was treated poorly and everything, but then like you know what, I'm gonna marry her, and say her mother basically takes all her connections and sends photos and things. And at that time, obviously she becomes this main player of political, I guess, alliance, where German king also wants her to marry the Prince of Russia or whatever, Prince of Sweden, but now Prince of Russia, I guess. Marry him. Obviously Russian Empress also wants that, and I guess Catherine doesn't even realize that, like, I'm part of this alliance or something. And now there's going to be backstabbing or something to make sure that this doesn't happen by somebody who doesn't want this to happen. This become all this political play and backstabbing and shit. And it involves someone that doesn't realize all these things, but it's gonna become Catherine the Great apparently. And there's a name, Catherine the Great, so probably she did lots of shit that made her Catherine the Great apparently. This is gonna be fun series, man. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe, check out the Rick's and there's a link in the description, check out the cards we'll play, check out the end cards, and I'll see you next time.